record on this computer? Okay, it looks like I'm recording. Amazing. Okay, so before we get into everything, let's introduce ourselves. So hi everyone, I'm Jessie and I'm a junior undergraduate student studying information science, concentrating in data science, and then minoring in global engineering leadership. And I am the co-undergraduate representative with Paula.
Hi, I am also the other co-undergraduate representative for UXTerps, and my name is Paula Shin. I am a sophomore majoring in information systems and marketing.
Yay! And hopefully double majoring soon in information science. We'll see how that goes. So excited for you. Okay, so this is our 4th design challenge. And just for future notice, we are creating a playlist that's going to house all of our different design challenges so you can just easily access them whenever you want to, especially for future challenges that might be really beneficial for you to sort of see what we're looking for, see generally what questions we're asking, etc. Okay. So this is what our workshop agenda looks like. We're introducing the design challenge for this week. Then we're talking more about responsive web design, then going into some more resources for hi-fi prototyping, and then some additional resources for continued learning, especially if you're just more advanced and you are already really experienced in UX design. We want to make sure that you also benefit from these presentations. And that's why we've included some really interesting opportunities for further learning throughout this presentation, as well as at the very end. So this is our problem statement for this week. And it reads, compared to the world's average annual carbon dioxide emissions per human of 4 tons, which is still a lot, the average American produces about 20 metric tons. This creates an abnormally large carbon footprint, which is depleting resources and exacerbating climate change. Our carbon footprint can be reduced in many ways, such as refraining from fast fashion, reducing the use of plastic bags, and driving less frequently. So we're looking for a few different things here, right? Essentially, just designing a website is going to be a really exciting activity. And what we're looking for in that website is whether or not you're able to effectively house, categorize, and organize different environmentally related efforts and activities. And as part of this, you don't have to make an entire website. Oh my goodness, you don't have to code one unless you want to, which is amazing. But all we're asking for is a high fidelity prototype of a website that's responsive and would be ready for user testing. You don't necessarily need to do user testing if it's not of convenience at this time, totally understandable, but just so that it's ready for user testing. And specifically asking yourself throughout the creation of your website, what navigational elements have you implemented and whether those make sense with the information you're presenting. Paula, do you want to explain our key question here?
Yeah, sure.
Awesome.
So we want to know how you would make your website accessible to users who are not that familiar with eco-friendly ways. And so as well as those who are already well-versed in environmentalism. And so what would make your website different from other available platforms that address individual needs?
Fabulous. And so those are our main questions and generally what we're looking for. And we're going to provide you with more information about all the skills that you might need during this presentation. So let's start off with exploring responsive design, because this might be, I know for me definitely was an unfamiliar term. And so let's explore this a little bit. So we've all had good and bad experiences with websites because we've all interacted with a variety of websites at one point or another. And when you're watching this recording later, you're probably interacting with the YouTube website. But you've also probably interacted with a website that's been unintuitive, hard to navigate, but then you've also interacted with websites that have been engaging, enjoyable, functional, and helpful. And so what exactly leads to such diverse experiences online when interacting with websites? Well, let's say we saw a website that looked like this on our computer. So we can notice a few different things here. It seems pretty clean. You know, you've got text over here, an image right here, a clear button, and then some menu items. Um, but, you know, what if the paragraph text that we circled here actually ends up overlapping with the image when you're on a mobile view? Let's say you open this on your phone and it looks completely different, but not in a good way. And then what if the menu text also didn't adjust and all of the menu items ended up stacked on top of each other? That wouldn't be very easy to navigate. But the good thing is that these are all issues we can avoid. One answer is through responsive design. And so an important note before we talk about responsive design, there are a lot of websites that are super responsive, look beautiful, strategically implement animations, etc. But it's still a fundamentally poor design if it's not accessible. And accessibility means a variety of different things. And W3C has actually released a wealth of information on best practices for ensuring accessibility, ranging from clear contrast to alternate text and images to best ways to use sort of semantic headers, all these sorts of things that are really awesome, that we really encourage you to look at when you're creating this high fidelity prototype. But back to responsive design. So it's an approach that prioritizes user behavior and environment. So what exactly does this mean, right? Well, we can break this down into a few different things. We can consider things like screen size, so whether or not you're on a computer or on a phone or on a tablet, etc. Orientation, so are you looking at it horizontally, vertically, etc. And then platform, what actual browser are you looking at the website with? And so we can focus on a lot of different stylistic features that afford responsiveness. And so we've provided 4 different features that are really helpful to start your journey. And you can click on the different resources that talk about them more in depth, with the advanced content links below each picture. So we've got Flexbox and Grids. This is so helpful with making a responsive layout, because ultimately we can have different content within different portions of our screen, but that will likely change as we change views. So again, advanced content, go ahead and click there if you want to learn more about Flexbox and Grids. CSS Media Queries are also incredible because they allow you to actually code unique CSS based on a width, based on screen size or screen width rather. And this can be really helpful because we can anticipate certain dimensions, not necessarily everything, but at least we know we can pretty accurately detect whether or not something's on a mobile view versus a web-based view. But this is not always the end all be all because we can't completely predict all different dimensions. But that's where image resizing and VMVH sizing comes in. So image resizing, images can be really complex. As in, you know, they can become more pixelated in different screen sizes. They can be really difficult to adjust. But that's not always the case, right? We can use something called percentage sizing. And so we could make the width 100%, and then that could just change as the width changes. And there's a lot more information on image resizing at this link. And then finally, we've got VMVH sizing, which is essentially adjusting the content based on the screen size itself, based on the version width or version height. And again, we've got some really fantastic resources here. But what all of this relates back to is that all of these different components and different strategies make a platform or make a system more fluid and adaptive. This actually enables us to preemptively take into account user preferences because we can't predict everything, but at least we can account for some things, right? So if a user is choosing a mobile device, we want to say, cool, that's great. I'm going to create a new design based on the previous one that I've made, maybe for web, that adapts to you. But then if a user favors an extra large screen, maybe it's on a monitor, we also want to say awesome and encourage them to sustain that preference. And then if it's a tablet too, we want to say we've got you covered. Because ultimately at the end of the day, we can't really anticipate every single user preference or even identify new categories of users for our deliverables, but we can always favor fundamentally more fluid and adaptive websites and interfaces that can actually flex to different user needs and preferences. And ultimately, we've talked about some pretty concrete things, right? We've talked about the methodologies, but is responsive design just the sum of different methodologies and stylistic choices? Not necessarily. We can consider it as more of a philosophy. We can anticipate as well that, we want to design flexible interfaces that aren't strictly designed for different dimensions. And that's why we favor fluidity. Because despite the fact that many commonly used phones and computers might fall into different dimensions, we still can't anticipate all of these dimensional variables, right? Which is why we're favoring fluid and automatically adjusted images and layouts and structures. And like you could see in some of the previous components that we've discussed, you have plenty of options. We can create things like sliding composite images, scalable foreground images, or even just hide images if they're going to disrupt our layout at a certain screen size. And we can also give max widths and have them adjust accordingly based on percentages. And then if you want to learn even more information about the different options, you can just click on this link. Sweet, I'm going to pass this over to Paula.
All right, thanks, Jesse. So now let's talk about high fidelity prototyping. So a high fidelity prototype is an interactive representation of a digital product that is most similar to its final design. It includes the final user interface, such as the color scheme, aesthetics, and other stylistic elements, as well as the user experience, which consists of the interactions, how a user might go through an app or website, as well as the animations within the product. So the prototype has translated all of the designers' research findings into a comprehensive product that allows the UX designer to understand more information about the user behavior. And here is an example of a high fidelity prototype, which you might see at the end of one's case study, and it typically shows the interactions of the app in lifetime. And so now I will present some of the benefits of a high fidelity prototype. So it tests the UI and the UX on a potential user. The user interface components, such as the colors, layout, and information hierarchy, can affect how the user feels about the product. So is it easy and efficient for them to use? The user experience components, such as transitions, animations, and mini interactions, help gauge user behavior. And so how might a user know what to click? How might they approach a certain feature? As well as other questions that are useful to keep in mind during a user test, which I will give more examples on a later slide. Another benefit is that testing the product helps the designer to receive feedback on the validity of their designs. The high fidelity prototype helps UX designers test their product before it launches in order to foresee any problems that might occur with their product. And by conducting a usability test on their target users, designers can receive tangible feedback that brings the product closer to its final iteration in terms of detail and functionality. So here are some of the sample questions to consider during a user test. So does the prototype do what it's supposed to? What's the first thing users would want to do, and can they do that? And when they explore the product, do they become confused at any point? And by asking these questions, the UX designer is able to see the effectiveness of their prototype and any problems that they may need to fix for the next version. So if you're looking to build one of your own, these are some of the examples of common design tools that people use. There's Adobe XD, Figma, and InVision Studio. These are all free and you can download them right onto your own computer. A personal favorite is Figma because not only is it pretty simple to understand and easy to collaborate on, there's an app that goes along with it called Figma Mirror where you can, if you have created an app prototype, you can preview it onto your own phone and test it on yourself.
Amazing, Paula. So now we have some resources for continued learning. And this is for everybody. All of these resources will hopefully make sense based on the information that we've provided to you thus far, but especially for people who have prior knowledge and user experience, these are going to be really helpful for reinforcing this material. So if you're just starting out, high fidelity prototyping, Paula did an incredible job with explaining what high fidelity prototyping is. And now we've got some other additional resources if you'd like to learn more about the purpose of hi-fi prototyping, how it's different from something like lo-fi prototyping, and yeah, some general information about it as well. And then if you're actually building your hi-fi prototype or your website, there are some really great examples of responsive design that we've linked here. And then finally, if you want some more examples of hi-fi prototyping, that's wonderful. And so we've got this great resource about what makes hi-fi prototyping such an excellent part of UX design, and then how you can make your hi-fi prototypes good and helpful and actually informative. So I believe that is all, Paula. So essentially, now what we're going to do is just explain a little bit more about how you can submit your designs. We really encourage you to submit your designs, whatever stage they are at, by the end of the week. And we're also going to be posting just reminders on Instagram as well as some of our other social medias. So definitely follow us on those so that you can get more information every week about our design challenges and provide us with some feedback on how we're doing. And then also, if you have any questions at all, just send us an email at uxterps@gmail.com. And that's also the place where you can submit your designs. And anyone on our team will provide you with feedback, but it'll likely be Paula or myself. So yeah, this was wonderful, Paula. Okay, I'm going to stop the recording.